Tonight, more lawsuits have been filed against two popular Jacksonville plastic surgeons, Lauren Clayman and his son Mark. Well, tomorrow the Florida Board of Medicine will consider a proposed settlement in the first set of complaints. The attorney says it is an injustice to his clients and he called it a slap on the wrist. All your sides, Ken Amaro with the story.
The Claymans practiced out of St. Vincent's Medical Complex for 4 decades. They were evicted shortly after 264 clients filed complaints against them. In their ads, they offered Botox, hair removal, and breast augmentation. In the 2016 complaints, the clients alleged their breast implants were painful or the wrong size, and some were left disfigured. Those complaints have now been settled in court, but not the one before the Department of Health. In 2019, an administrative complaint revealed the claimants failed to properly keep records of their clients. Investigators suggested several penalties, including revoking their license.
Was actually one complaint with 264 victims.
One of them is Susan Rayburn. Chris Shakib is her lawyer.
She wasn't ever notified of the settlement.
March 2020, the Department of Health entered a proposed settlement with the claimants, to the victims' surprise. It issued a letter of concern, a fine of $5,000, and reimbursement to the state of $11,000, and it requires them to take continuing education courses.
Because this is not justice. It's a slap on the wrist.
Attorney Shakib says state investigators did not look at the evidence.
The most important allegations we made in the complaint are not part of what they pursued and what the settlement agreement encompasses.
Shakib wants the Board of Medicine to revoke the claimant's medical license.
It's unbelievable and it's unacceptable.
Shakib and his client will ask the Florida Board of Medicine to reject the proposed settlement. If they don't, they plan to appeal. Kathy Hood, the lawyer for the claimants, simply said no comment. Ken Amaro, First Coast News, on your side.